Welcome to Right on Track, a songwriting podcast. Thanks to Tone for tuning in. I'm Demi Michelle Schwartz, and I'm thrilled you're joining me on my songwriting journey. So kick back and relax, don't fall flat, and remember, stay right on track. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Right on Track. I am so excited because joining me today is a very special guest. Please welcome Chuck Smith. Hi Chuck.
How you doing, Demi?
I'm doing great, how are you?
Not too bad. Weather's good in California right now.
So jealous here in California. I haven't been there in quite a while. My aunt and uncle live out there and I took frequent trips out there pre-pandemic, but I haven't been since, so I'm hoping to get out there soon.
Well, given the weather in a lot of different places in the world right now, I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, it's been pretty nice here in Pittsburgh, but nothing beats California.
Oh, you're in Pittsburgh.
I am. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I went to school for a while in Philadelphia. My dad is from a small town near Philadelphia.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Yep. I'm from Pitt. Well, I'm so honored you're joining me today because we're going to be chatting about many things. But before we get into our conversation, can you share with the listeners a little about yourself and how you got started in the music industry?
Yes. I started playing guitar when I heard Elvis and Little Richard and Chuck Berry. So that's a long time ago. And I was in a band by the time I was 12 years old, which would have been before Elvis went in the Army. So a lot of musicians say that when the Beatles appeared on Ed Sullivan, that was the moment where they knew what they wanted to do in life. But when I saw that, and I was just as excited as everybody else, I'd been in bands for several years already. And back then you had a lead singer, 3 background singers, and then the group. So it was a little different. And so I kept playing in bands, and I was on television very early on when bands weren't on television. Rock and roll was people were still burning records and stuff like that. And then I managed to get my first record deal on Columbia Records in about 1965, I guess, somewhere in there. Went through that whole thing, then finished college. And then eventually I came out to California to seek my fortune in music, more or less, and got very lucky. Within about a year and a half, I had a record deal and a writer's deal with Motown Records, and also got a album cut, which became the title album cut for Diana Ross. So that was a real nice moment, and continued on. And then after I was through that, I started teaching quite a bit. I was teaching guitar, voice, and songwriting. And one of my students during that time was in the multi-platinum band Incubus. I taught him and the lead singer for a while. And then when he left the group, probably 6-7 years later, he started taking music theory lessons from me and said, "Hey, do you want to put something together?" So then for the next 9 years, he and I and a girl drummer, actually, excellent drummer, we had a band together and made an album and did all of that. Since that time, I've been doing recordings on my own of all my own original stuff and been putting them on these really fabulous videos that a friend of mine, Adam Lobel, has been doing. And so I've been concentrating on that and, of course, dealing with all the changes in how you market yourself as a musician these days. And so I guess that brings us up to the present day.
Yeah, no, you have such an incredible journey doing so much, from writing for Diana Ross to being a successful teacher and working with incredible people to being an artist yourself. So you definitely have a very round perspective of being in the business. But let's talk first about songwriting. So when you began songwriting, how did you go about building your network while also continuing to develop your craft?
Well, when I started writing, it's because I admired people who were songwriters. So that meant initially Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys, but of course, John and Paul and the Beatles and everybody who was in bands that were writing their own tunes, which of course in the 60s was just about everybody. And Bob Dylan was also a big factor back then, especially when he went electric. So when I started writing, I was writing songs for the band I was in, which was Buddies in high school. And luckily, the place I lived in Louisville, Kentucky, there were all kinds of bands of teenagers. And there was all of us, we'd go to each other's gigs, and we actually got paid for our gigs. And I feel badly for actually for the last 25 or 30 years, bands, they don't make money, especially young bands. It's, you pay to play a lot of times. So it's really awful. But yeah, my songwriting process was all inspired by those people in the 60s. And I just started writing. And I also was very interested in lyrics at the same time. So that was a big part of it, because I feel until this day it's the same. Lyrics are not as good as the music, generally speaking. There's very few really good lyricists, in my opinion.
That's a really great point you bring up, especially in the very contemporary pop world. I love pop music and I also love country. And not to compare the two genres because they're very different, but when you listen to a pop song, it's very about, the groove and the music and the production. But when you actually sit down and read lyrics of a country song, that's where I think a lot of the storytelling is. And I think that's why me as an artist, I'm very crossover pop country because I have a creative writing background as well. I love storytelling. And I think that's like the heart of music. You want your lyrics to say something. And so I definitely agree with you, though, how I think the emphasis is less on what the songs are saying and more how they sound.
Yeah, I mean, but I've had people that come into me for songwriting lessons. One of the things I always try to tell them is, if you're going to write a love song, for example, which has been done how many times we can't even
Yeah.
count. And if you listen to some really great hit songs in all genres, really, you'll hear a lot of the same tropes being said over and over and over again. So I always try to tell people, if you're going to write about love, which is fine, try to find another way into it. Try to find a unique story, something that illustrates what you're talking about, so you can make it a more interesting way to say the song. It just, so much of it is, like you say, it's a repetition. And the thing I would say about country is the opposite problem. I agree with you that there's much more storytelling there, but particularly in contemporary country, you're getting a lot more of that pop sound, the way you're talking about the pop world is recording things. So country is not sounding so country anymore.
Right. Yeah. No, it's really interesting how I think music in general is being changed in many ways for mainstream purposes. And I think for that reason, we're losing the heart of what it should be. Some of my favorite songs aren't even on the radio. Like, I love finding artists that maybe they're independent or maybe they're signed, but they're not like big, big names. I love their music, I think, more than extremely mainstream artists because I kind of see a little more freedom and exploration.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'll give you an example. Here's real contemporary. There's an indie rock movement going on now that a lot of the teenagers are into. And there's a really bizarre way that some of these acts become famous. For example, there's a group from Vancouver, and they had a song called Hayloft that they did in 2008. And it was only in the last few years that somebody used the track for a TikTok video.
Yeah.
This band is looking at their social media thing blowing up, and it's because somebody's used their song on a TikTok video. So then I look at Spotify and they got 340 million streams.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, and then 5 other songs of theirs are also listed there with these astronomical figures.
Yeah. So that's a great transition into talking about the business side of all this. The way the industry is now, there's a lot of different things going on. You mentioned TikTok and the power of social media and really Gen Z and all the things they're doing. So how are you seeing songwriters getting discovered not only through traditional ways, but their songs being discovered on these platforms and how that's contrasting with how things used to be?
Well, of course, there wasn't anything like social media up until 20 years ago or something like that. And it's become more refined in the way it's being used. Of course, TikTok hasn't been around all that long. But it's interesting. I just posted something up on TikTok about a month ago that's a Putin takedown, really. Pretty elaborate production and everything, something I'm really proud of. But they flagged it for multiple violations, they said, and they threatened to take down my account. Now, when you think all the trash that goes on to something like TikTok or even Instagram, And I was flagged for protesting this guy who's responsible for thousands of people being killed. So you have to deal with that stuff. It's really incredible. But I mentioned the indie thing there because these bands are writing some pretty crazy lyrics, and they're all how would you say, they're quirky, and I don't think they're worried about any particular marketplace. There's a way to make it with social media if you can latch on to something like this and make it go viral. And obviously, if you're younger, you have a better chance because you've grown up with all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. So now I want to talk a little bit about your experience with teaching. You mentioned teaching guitar and voice and songwriting, and I also read that you did some mentoring with those who were auditioning for American Idol as well, and so I think that's awesome. So what inspired you to take your knowledge from your own experiences and begin to teach others?
I started doing it just a little bit on the side until I there was a store that had quite a teaching, um, a lot of people going to learn different instruments there. But when I was doing it earlier, I realized that I had a knack for it. It's as simple as that. People stayed with me for years. I actually have students right now that took from me when they were in high school, and they're now near 40 and they're taking lessons again. So it was just something I had a knack for, really, and I enjoyed it. And yeah, and that's how it happened, really, Demi. It was really that because and a lot of musicians will tell you. A lot of my friends really fine musicians, but they say I could not teach. It is a skill, and it doesn't matter how good a player. Like for example, I can teach somebody who's actually a better player than I am. I can teach them things, and so yeah, teaching is a performance as well. So that's how I got into it.
That's a really great perspective. I completely agree. Yeah, there's so many talented people, but I definitely think teaching requires various skill sets that aren't found in the arts themselves. So I think that's awesome. As you were teaching, have you learned anything about yourself or grown as an individual?
Well, absolutely. But a lot of that came from things that weren't really about the music necessarily. I became involved in people's lives, particularly teenagers and middle school kids, even younger, so that I was asked by parents to talk to their kids. In other words, I was somebody that all these younger people could talk to. And so a lot of that doesn't have a lot to do with music, really, but it came because of the connection of somebody coming to me to learn an instrument or to learn how to sing or to learn how to write songs. That was really it was heartwarming, really. I'm trying to find another word for it, but it was really helped me as a person. It absolutely did.
That's incredible. And I think too, because we can get so focused on the art, but I think at the end of the day, no matter what you're doing, it should be focused on meeting people and being a part of their lives and their journeys and helping them grow and growing yourself. And so I love how something that really stood out to you was being able to meet so many people and build those connections.
Yeah, and you build it through music. And of course, I also had an inordinate number of people who are still doing music, performing, or they're in the business side of it. There's all kinds of them. Probably I could probably list 100. So I felt like, well, okay, maybe I did something there that kept them in the music business in some way or another and kept them playing.
For sure. Yeah, because it's definitely a tough business to be a part of. So any kind of motivation or support and you as a teacher are encouraging them and helping them become better. So that's just massive inspiration to keep going.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Now, I wanted to ask you something, Demi. You just did an album, I believe. Is
I
that
did.
correct?
Yeah, I did. And I'm working on an EP currently.
Okay, so when you write, so we can talk about songwriting here a little bit. Are you trying to write a hit song somewhere there in that list of songs you're writing on an album or an EP?
Yeah, so I think for me, the number one thing is always authenticity. I think that my focus isn't necessarily on what I have to do for it to be a hit song. It's about what is authentic to me while still using songwriting tools that are heard in a lot of the commercial music, sticking to what commercial music is and fitting into that area, but not necessarily writing on topics that are overdone or expected. Because I've definitely found that some of my favorite songs, especially on my upcoming EP and the one I'm writing for right now, is I'm writing about things that I have never heard other songs be talked about, concepts I never heard. And that just makes me very excited because it's not like I'm writing a song that I've heard a bunch of times. And so I'm just trying to be more open minded with my inspiration and what I'm writing about. I guess like what I'm trying to say is I'm not thinking in my head as I'm writing a hit song because I think that puts unnecessary pressure on what I'm writing. But I'm definitely using like the structure and doing the melody certain ways, making motifs reflect from verse to verse and lyrical rhyme and all of those things. Like using the tools that are in hit songs, but not giving myself the pressure of I need to write about this for it to be a hit song. I think I'm talking more about the lyrical content and what I'm writing about rather than like the musical side when I'm being more innovative.
Yeah, because that's the discussion you need to have with someone who wants to learn songwriting. Is you really gotta be tight, and you gotta think, okay, is this when somebody's listening to this, are they picking up the chorus and the verse? Can they sing
Right,
it?
exactly, for sure.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that it has to be corny or simple or anything like that. There are ways to do this in all kinds of ways. There's ways to structure a song so that it's memorable
Yeah,
in all the best ways, right?
for sure. Yeah, my thing is bridges. I love bridges. Like I love bridges. Songs that don't have bridges, I'm like, no.
Well, now see, you probably don't like Bob Dylan because a lot of his things don't have bridges.
Yeah, yeah. I just love my verses and choruses and my bridges. Yeah.
Bridges are great. They're excellent. But I happen to notice that Bob has not written a whole lot of
No.
bridges.
Nope. But look where he is. So, yeah. So, I wanted to ask you also about your performance side. I know you said that you're working on original music as well that you're releasing and you've done performing. So, contrasting that with songwriting, what is your favorite thing about being an artist?
The songwriting, it definitely is. Although uh, when I do perform, although I'm not one of those theatrical type people that has to be in front of an audience all the time, I do firmly believe, though, that when I perform, I don't want to be a shoegazer. I want to project some energy and all that sort of thing to put my music across. I don't want it to be boring up there. I don't want to stand there. So I think performing is real important.
That's awesome. So, can you talk about your process of determining what songs are best to record as an artist and perform? Because I write so much. I know there's a lot of other artists that write so much and they want to perform everything, but it comes down to picking the right songs. So, what is your criteria for determining what songs those are?
Um, well, I don't really have to make that choice because I don't write a lot. I'm not prolific. So I spend time. Each song is kind of a project. If you kind of get my meaning there, a lot of my tunes are topical these days. Although I did write a love song recently, but they're very topical. A lot of them, like I mentioned, the Putin thing. I've got one about climate, and I usually try to incorporate humor into them. So I take each one of them. So I don't have a lot there to choose from at any given time. And I just re-recorded the first song that I ever wrote that I thought showed me a path forward, both lyrically and musically. And I just re-recorded it and had a video made. So I did that. That would be me. I don't write a lot. So I've just got a certain number there that I would be working on. And then those would be the ones I'd perform.
Okay, yeah, totally. That makes total sense. I'm very prolific, so I'm like I have like 12 songs, and then I have to like determine because I think revising and really getting deep is my favorite part of the whole process. So I think I like write songs, get them in drafts, and then really go through and pick like okay, these are the five that I really want to pursue, and then just spend like weeks or however long to really craft them. So, for the songwriters listening who may be struggling to either get started or get to the next level, what advice would you give them?
For lyricists, the first thing I would say is to get a hold of a rhyming dictionary. And there is one that's free online. It's called Rhymer. and you can just skip that. And if you actually write your lyrics on your computer or something, you can put it to the side because it will give you a whole lot of ideas of rhymes that you would have never thought of, which will also give you ideas for lines that you had not thought of. And it'll really give you turns of phrase and everything else that will really help the writing process. So that's the first little kernel I would give people, is to get a rhyming dictionary immediately, because it's a big help, huge help. Musically, I can write melodies for a song very quickly. Lyrics take me a long time because I really want them to be as excellent as I can make them. So if you're writing melodies, what happens is people will play something for me, and then they'll sing something, and then invariably they'll play something on the guitar or the piano. Okay, this is the thing that goes here. And I said, well, wait a minute. That's not the song. That's production. I just want to hear the song, the bare bones song. And if that can stand up, that's all you need.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I've definitely been encouraged where we wrote a chorus or something, and I was like, oh, I think that chorus can be stronger. It doesn't really contrast with the verses. And they're like, oh, well, when we do the production, we can really like add in all these instruments. I'm like, no, like you want to be able to play this song like stripped it down and it sound good. Like you can't rely on production to make it sound good.
No, and as a matter of fact, Demi, and this was something that was always said back way long time ago, is that a song should be able to stand on its own with just a vocal and the piano, or a vocal and a guitar. That's it. And if your song doesn't stand up with that, then all the production in the world isn't going to help.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, like it's really challenging because I did a couple top lines, and that's not how I write. Like I don't write from chords, I don't write from any kind of instrumental. Like I always start with the lyrics and the melody and my piano or my guitar. And so when I did top lining, it was like kind of a challenge because I felt like it was a fun experience, but I felt really boxed in. Like I have to keep this verse in four lines, and I can't really go extremely high because these chords aren't really lifting in the chorus. So you kind of had to like tailor the song to that. But it was really difficult because I still wanted to be able to sing that song stripped down, and so I had to make sure like after I top lined it, when I grabbed my guitar, sat down at the piano, and sang it, it still could stand on its own.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you there. But I think if writing the words first is how you best work, then do it that way. There's no right way to do it, right? I mean, I have done both. I have had the lyrics written first. I have done the melody first. I've done them kind of the same time together. I've done it all different ways. But I know plenty of songwriters that are like you. They have to come at it from one way or the other, either through the music or the lyrics. I don't think there is any one right way to do it or to write a song. It's just you've got to make that thing stand up. Forget the production.
Yeah.
Make that song so that when you play it on your piano or your guitar, somebody is mesmerized. They can hear the thing. They can hear a song.
Right. Yeah, and the cool thing with that too is like if you have a song that stands so well on its own, so stripped down, then that gives a lot of freedom for whether it be pitching purposes, like you can take it different genres because they're not locked into a genre. Like there's so many songs that I know of that are very successful songs that various artists would cover on tour or like release cover versions in different genres, and they would tailor the song to their style. And I feel like the reason they were able to do that was because the song was so well done on its own that when you brought in the production and the style, they were able to spin it to their styles.
A very good point. No, that's an excellent point. That's another reason why production is overrated, because
Yeah.
you do open it up to more different genres and more different kinds of artists, because all they're trying to hear is a great song.
Yeah.
And so if you muddle it up with some kind of production that aims it in one genre or the other, then you're cutting yourself off from other genres that might be able to use that song.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. So this was lovely chatting. We covered so much. I have just one more question for you.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so this is looking forward in the music industry. We've seen so many changes very recently, especially. But what advice would you give to songwriters if they are struggling to feel motivated in the business that we're living in today?
That's a tough question because ultimately you have to be self motivated. If it's something you really want to do, then you're going to do it regardless. And if you're younger, you probably already are aware and handy with all the social media and the digital stuff. But one of the things now, of course, is that songwriters have to get their things into TV, movies, commercials, all that kind of stuff. That's where you can really make some money. Unless you get something that goes viral on TikTok or Instagram or something like that, and you get lucky, right? Or if you're playing a lot and you're working social media and you're working your websites and all that kind of stuff, and you're trying to sell merch, all these different things become revenue streams, which is what a lot of bands have to do. And if you've got the talent and the wherewithal to do that, then you can cobble together a career, even if you don't have a big hit record, even if you're not Billie Eilish. But Billie Eilish started with her brother in the bedroom working with a laptop computer, and they essentially still do the same thing. They got lucky, and they're both very talented people, and it's a great story. And she's also somebody who likes performance. She also likes the fashion thing. She's got it all happening. And so if you look at someone like her or Olivia Rodrigo's, another young talent, she's a real fine songwriter, good singer, everything else. She's got a sense of humor. That song "Brutal" is hilarious. You can do it. You can cobble together a career, but you've got to work all these things. I know a guy that does hip hop, and he writes his own things, and he makes about 80 grand a year just working that. But he says, I'm working all the time. He's like 6 days a week. He's on that computer constantly. So it takes a lot of that. But if you can get your songs into some of these other areas, like commercials and TV and movies. Now, see, back in the day, back in the 60s, for example, none of us wanted our stuff in any of those things because that was selling out. So that shows you how things have changed. Rock and roll didn't want to be in a commercial. No way in hell. That wasn't going to happen. But of course, we were all making money from the sales of records, which has been completely wiped out.
Yeah.
And I'll share a little tidbit with you. The manager I used to have years ago, he and I got together recently, and he still handles some very, very huge artists. I won't name them because I don't want to do that. But in the case of an artist who's a country artist, a very well-known country artist, and I asked him, I said, how much of his total income is coming from either the streaming or the sales of CDs or records, any of that? He said 2%.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, and here's another thing. I mentioned that group that had 340 million streams. So a buddy and I, who I do recording with, who's also a former student of mine, he and I went online and had you can figure out online what that would give you. And so 340 million streams gets you $150,000.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's really crazy. Something's got to change, and I don't know how that's going to happen or if it will happen or if there's another kind of technology that'll come and take over. I mean, the Todd Rundgren, who just got in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he calls it now a service industry. So you're out there working, you're doing your tours and you become kind of a service person. So he looks at it that way. It used to be you did the tour to promote your record, right?
Yeah.
Well, now you do the record to promote your tour.
So backwards.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I can't tell you, Demi, for all us musicians back in the day, one of the things we always loved to do is get together and listen to the latest things of people we liked or people we wanted to discover. And you sat there and listened while you looked at the album cover and saw who played on it, who wrote the songs and all the other stuff that was on there, and it was so much fun, and it was helped you enjoy the music so much more. You were immersed in it,
Yeah.
and now that's all been taken away.
Yeah, it's really sad. I feel like the value is just declined, especially with like songwriters, um, we don't have to get into the whole like Spotify battle thing, but it's just like just very recently, I don't even know, maybe like a year or 2 years ago, they just started listing songwriting credits. Like up until that point, you couldn't see who was actually writing the songs. And I was just like really sad. It was like even very successful songwriters weren't getting public recognition for their work. And I was like, that's not nice.
Well, yeah, and also here's another thing, a trend that's happened because of the way they record music, particularly for producers like Max Martin and Dr. Luke and all this, where you have a whole series of people that are on the writing credits. You might have 4 or 5 people on there, which is because somebody started with some kind of beat, and then somebody said, okay, work with that a little bit more. So they do that. And then they finally say, okay, that's good. And then they give it to somebody else who works on the melody. And then meanwhile, somebody else is going to contribute some lyrics, and then somebody else will add to those lyrics, and then they work with the production, and they finally get a song. And that's the way a lot of the production goes on the top 40 song list there. So that's a whole different way of writing songs. I'm not saying if it's good or bad, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, if you're like Taylor Swift and you can write your own, shout out to you. But I think like the thing with that is the more writers you have on a song, the percentages are just smaller, and the way that royalties are and everything else, like songwriters are hardly making anything. Like the less percent you have of a song because there's so many people on it, the less you're gonna get. That's another thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And in mentioning Taylor Swift, I think and I've said this many times before, I think she's a great role model for women
Yeah.
because she calls the shots. I don't care what part of her career you want to talk about, and certainly the songwriting. I mean, she does write with people, particularly that producer Aronoff, but she's the king of that, or the queen of her career. She's done it all, and she stood up for all the rest of us on a number of occasions, both with Apple and with Spotify. So I have nothing but praise for her. I think
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, she's really good, and she's also a very fine songwriter. I mean, I don't think anybody can deny that. She writes really good lyrics for the kind of audience she's after and for who she is. And I think that's a good example of a songwriter who's really writing things that are true to her. And they're also incredibly commercial, and her voice is. She and Katy Perry, I mean, talk about two commercial voices that are really good, you know. And Taylor Swift didn't used to be that good. When you used to see her early in her career, when you'd see her on TV, she was a little shaky, but now she's a real fine singer. She really is.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. The Swifties here.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love Taylor so much. But Chuck, it was lovely having you on. Can you share with the listeners where they can find all that you do online?
yeah, straydeuce.com is my website. And then I'm also on Instagram and TikTok and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's where you find me. And I have a YouTube channel too. Chuck Smith, Stray Deuce. That's where you can find me. There's a lot of cool videos on there and songs.
Of course. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It was lovely having you. Listeners, thank you for listening to this episode with Chuck Smith. And of course, until next time, stay
Stay
right on
right on
track.
track.